Hi guys, Samantha from Jessama Tutorials here, and today I'm going to be doing a tutorial using my Jellyroll Mokume Gane technique. Now, my Jellyroll Mokume Gane video hit 10,000 views just a little while ago, and so this video is in celebration of that. So thank you everybody who watched that tutorial. I really appreciate your support. Now, what you're going to need, of course, is a sheet of your Jellyroll Mokume Gane. And if you haven't watched the tutorial, I will include it in the links below for you to go and check out. But this is what we're going to be using today. You're also going to need a sheet of black of any brand. I'm using Primo today. And this was rolled to on my thickest setting. And you're going to put your piece of your Jellyroll Mokume Gane onto your black and just trim it up. Now, I'm going to be making domed beads today, and that is why this is going to be so thick, because the thicker it is, the better a dome you're going to get. So this is about twice my thickest setting on my pasta machine, like that. Okay, so now I'm just going to take my acrylic rod and use it to roll my sheet flat, because we've got a little bit of an uneven surface. Okay, so that's what we're going to need. Now, I just want to talk about something quickly. You can use any cookie cutters you want, but I've made my own. And these ones are used only for doming, because as you can see they're not quite symmetrical, so they only really work with the dome technique where you can't see exactly if they're symmetrical or not. So I tried to get them as symmetrical as possible, but it's really hard. And I made these out of a round cutter like this, and Ludmila's got a great video on this, so I'm just going to send you to her channel because I'm not very good at it, so there's no point me showing you how to do it really. I just basically pinched the end over here and flattened out the top to get this shape, but Ludmila's much better at it than me. So anyway, I'm going to be using those cutters today, but you can use any cutter you want. Now, I thought that this, although it's quite pretty, is going to be a little boring on its own, so I'm going to quickly show you how to make faux lava rock. And you're going to need some black for this, and again I'm just using black Primo, and I'm just going to roll it through a pasta machine quickly. There we are. And now what you're going to want to do is you just want to trim it up. There we are. Okay, now you're going to need salt. So I've just got a little grinder over here that I use. And before you use the salt, make sure that all other polymer clay is out of the way, because if you accidentally get the salt stuck in the polymer clay, you can't really do much about it. So make sure that all your clay is out of the way, because you only want the salt going where the salt's supposed to go. Okay, then I like to just grate it on top of the piece. And now those are rather fine particles, so then I'll open it up and I'll tip some of the larger pieces on as well. This is how I like to make my lava. Now just spread this out, make sure that it's fairly even. And I'll just press the pieces into the clay. That one's being stubborn. So I like to press it in with my fingers first to get it somewhat embedded, and then I'll bring my roller over and roll them in. So here's my acrylic rod. Don't put this through your pasta machine. You can scratch your rollers if you put this through. There you are. Okay, now there's some pretty big holes here, and it's worked its way through the sheet, so we need another sheet of black from the thickest setting, and we're going to place this on top of it. So here we are. Just going to pick this up and blow all the salt off your tile, and I'm going to take this over to the side and I'm going to blow the excess salt off of it. There we are. And then I'll bring it back over and place it on the piece, and then I'm going to trim up quickly before I do anything, because I don't want this excess clay to get salt on it, because then it's very difficult to get the salt out, and so it can ruin your clay if you didn't want the salt in there. So once I've trimmed it up, I'll just go and pat it down and bring over my acrylic rod and gently flatten it. Like that. Now just squish up the sides, because some of these pieces aren't fitting quite as well in there as I would like. Just squish up the sides like that. And that should be ready to go. Okay, so those are the two sheets that we are going to need. Now I'm going to show you how to dome your beads. So what you're going to need is a piece of plastic, and now this is a bag that I've ripped in two, like that, because I only want one layer of plastic. And you'll just bring over your sheet of polymer clay, and you're going to lay your plastic over the bag, over the sheet of polymer clay, and just smooth it over. And then we'll bring over the cutters that we want to use, and I'm going to choose where we want to cut. Okay, so I'm going to put it there. And then you want to kind of slowly work it into the polymer clay. Don't press down all at once. And I'm just going to stand up for this because I need my full body weight to put into this. And with one hand press down and with the other stabilize it, because it can sometimes push up like that and it can accidentally ruin your piece. So just press down with one hand, and then with the other hand hold it steady. And that way you should get a pretty good dome. And just go back and check every now and then to make sure that it's going the way that you want. And then when you're just about done, lift up the plastic. And now these cutters are quite sharp, so you might pierce through your plastic. If that happens, just take it to a different area and press down on it again. Okay, now what I'm going to do, excuse me if my head gets in by accident, so I'm just going to take my cutter and I'm going to actually press down on it so that I get a nice clean cut. I'll put that to the side. I'll sit back down. And that's basically how you dome a bead. And I'm just going to take my tissue blade and trim up the edges, because you want to make sure that it's nice and neat for when you put it in the oven. And you can fix up some edges that you're not quite happy with, just like that. So just be careful not to slice anything. I'm keeping this resting on my tile. I'm not lifting it up because otherwise I could accidentally slice something. So I'm using it basically to just manipulate it. and sometimes you'll get folds in your bead, like over here we've got a few folds from the plastic. You just want to smooth those out. Okay, and then when you're done, pick it up off your tile, and I'll just bring this over so you can see what a lovely dome that's given us. And there's the black on the back. So this is why I was so careful to give it a nice even look. I'll bring over another bead in a second to show you what would happen if you weren't careful to keep your cutter stable while you were cutting and you accidentally slipped. I'll bring over one to show you what it actually looks like. Okay, so here we are. Now I did manage to fix it, so it's not as bad as it was in the beginning. But here's a bead, and I'm just going to show it to you from the top, and that's what it looks like. So it's not disaster. I did manage to fix it, but you can see that the black shows up over here quite high on the other side, and this side's slightly lower. So I'll just swap that around. That side's got higher black, that side's got lower black. So my cutter accidentally slid towards this side. So I'll bring over the cutter and hopefully show you. So when I was slicing, it accidentally went like that. So it sliced deeper on this side. Well, on this side it sliced shallow, so it caused a bit of a problem. So you just really want to make sure that when you're doming your beads, you want to hold the cutter steady and press down, then swap hands and press down on the other side, and it will just save you some trouble. Okay, so that's the one. Now put that aside for the moment. Now I'm going to show you how to do that with the lava, and this one's a little trickier. So I'll put the plastic over the top, and I'm going to be using the next size cutter. Okay, so now I'm just going to angle where I want it. Excuse me if my head gets in. Okay, about there. Okay, so when you're doing this, you want to try and avoid having these large crystals from being half in your cutter and half out your cutter. And then just like the other one, you'll start doming it. And this one is going to look very rustic. Okay, so my bag split over there just a little bit, so I'm going to swap to another cleaner piece where it's not split, and I'll continue doming. There we go. Okay, then I'll press down, pick this up, bring it out the way, and that's what it's going to look like. Now the salt over here, we are going to run it under water once we have baked our bead, so it's not going to stay in the clay, it will dissolve. But the point of the salt is to make a texture so that it leaves those holes that you find in lava after it's cooled. And if you look at real lava, it's kind of uneven. You get these really small holes, and you get these really large holes. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here. Okay, so that's what it looks like. So I'm going to carry on doing that. And what I'm going to do, I'll just bring this over to show you the theory behind my madness. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the same sized cutter again and cut another piece of lava so that I have a replica of this one on the other side. Then I'm going to take a smaller one, the next size down that I have, and I'm going to cut two more out of my out of my jelly roll, and I'm going to put that next to the two lava beads. So I'll be back when I've finished that. Okay, so here we are. I've just finished up cutting out these beads, and so they're almost ready for the oven. But we've just one more step. The backs don't look that good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go put these out the way for the moment, and we're going to go and prepare a back for the beads. So here's a sheet of black that I rolled through on my second thinnest setting. So it's good and thin. And I'm going to go and take a 40 grit piece of sandpaper, and I've just ripped it off the stack because the piece is very big. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to use it to create a texture on this black. And you'll do this across the entire sheet, and then we will use this for the back of our beads. And the great thing about this is that you're basically piling a whole bunch of imperfections on top of themselves so that it doesn't look like an imperfection. But the great thing about that is if you do have any imperfections on the back of your bead, this will hide it. So any scratches that you accidentally had, or maybe dent marks from a knife accidentally going where it shouldn't, this will hide it. So this is my favorite, one of my favorite ways of finishing off the backs of my beads. So you want to make sure that you get enough texture onto here. So I like to go and burnish my sandpaper all over, and we're just about ready to use it. Then I'll bring over my blade and pick it up and very gently turn it upside down. And then I'll bring over my beads one at a time and position them onto the black and gently smooth them down like that. Then I'll bring over my cutters and we'll cut it out. Then I'll pick this up and put this to the side for the next bead. Now, because we domed our beads, our cutters aren't going to fit them exactly. So you're going to need to trim up the sides to get the background fitting with your bead. Just like that. And take lots of time to do this. The stage before you put your bead in the oven is the best stage to get your bead as perfect as possible, because while the clay is raw, it's the easiest to fix problems. Once it's baked, you're going to have to cover it up or you're going to have to sand it away. So if you accidentally see that you've got a fingerprint there, you'll just take your finger and smooth it over the surface of your bead and get rid of any unnecessary marks that could be avoided. And then I'll pick this up, and here's the back. Okay, now the sides over here aren't perfect, and we're going to use a smearing technique that I've shown in a previous video to get the sides looking perfect. So this is about ready for the oven. So I'd go and put this in at the recommended temperature for Primo, which is 275 Fahrenheit or 130 Celsius. And I'll come back when this is baked and the other four are baked, and I'll show you how to finish them off. Okay, so I've just pulled these out of the oven, and so they're a little bit warm but elastic, and so when you take something out of the oven, if it's elastic enough for you to do this, when it's this thick, you've baked it properly. Now these are going to go in for another half an hour long bake after I've shown you the next step to cleaning up these edges. But before we do that, we need to get rid of all this salt in here. So the way you do that is you'd go and submerge this in a tub of warm water and just let it sit. You can try and pick out the salt if you want while it's in the warm water, and you can scrub it as well, but so long as you sit it in a tub of warm water, it doesn't even have to be warm water, just that warm water will speed up the process. You want to soak this thoroughly because having salt in your bead still, when you come to varnish it, will cause lots of problems later on, so just make sure that you get rid of all of that salt. So these will get cleaned off, and then I'll be back and show you what we're going to do about these sides. So now that I've gone and rinsed out the salt, you can really see what it's going to look like. It's got these really nice big gaping holes where the large pieces of salt were, and because I put a few around the edges here, it's going down the sides as well. So that's how I like to do my lava, or faux lava. So now what you need to do is you need to clean up these sides. So what you're going to need for that is a soft piece of clay. Now I like to use black clay, and I'm going to be using Prima today. You can use any colour you want, but I find that the black works best. The white, it tends to get dirty anyway, so it doesn't look that good. Darker colours work best, it seems. So you just need a tiny bit. You need to make sure that you warm it up by running it in your hands, and you really only need a small amount. So I'm going to show you with this piece. So you can see that there are cracks and lines all along here. So what you'll do is you'll take your ball, form it into a short sausage, squish it up against the front of the bead, press your thumb against the bottom of the bead, and press your forefinger at the front and slowly smear across the bead. And now you might need to do this a few times to get it to stick, but that's basically what we want. We want it to give us a very light black border, and at the same time it will fill in those cracks for us. There you go. And then you can go back and refine it a little bit. I'll bring over my knife. I don't want this sitting up so high, so I'm just going to take my knife and shave off the clay that I don't want. So I don't want it this high. So you can spend some time making sure that it's to your liking. Just like that. Okay. And you need to just pay attention to the edges or the end of the bead, like over here, because sometimes it's a little bit more fiddly to get those areas right than along the side over here, so you might need to go back and do those edges properly. But that's basically what you would do the whole way around the bead. And then once you've done that, you would smooth it off using the base of your finger or the base of your palm, smoothing along the edge of the bead to create a somewhat shiny look, and that will smooth it out so that it's ready for baking. And because we smeared it on, that means that it's a very thin layer. So if I twist it round so that it looks flat to the camera, you can't actually see it. So it's not creating a border, it's just tidying up those edges for you. So this edge versus this edge. So you can see it's cracking on that edge, and that one's nice and smooth. So just make sure that you've gotten rid of all of the fingerprints you can, because you don't want to be sanding over here, because it's so thin that you would sand it right away if you were to try and sand away fingerprints. So just take extra care to make sure that you've gotten rid of all the fingerprints. And you do that the whole way around the bead, and you do that for all of your beads. And then what you would do once you finished that is you would bake it for another half an hour at the recommended temperature for your clay brand. And then we can come back and start sanding and drilling and finishing off our beads. Okay, So they've finished baking, and I brought them out the oven a little while ago, so they've cooled, and this is what they look like. Now what we need to do is give them a good sand, because the finish that I want on these is a Renaissance wax finish, so they need to be sanded really well. Now with Renaissance wax there are two options basically. You can either have a really nice warm shiny finish to a bead, where basically you have to sand the bead so that you have a really nice buff on it, and then use the Renaissance wax, and then you get a really nice shiny finish. Or you can use it to give a slight shine to your really rustic pieces like this one, where you've got texture and all sorts of things on it. So if you're looking for the rustic texture, you shouldn't really sand this. So we're not going to sand these ones, we're only going to sand these ones because we want a nice shiny finish contrasted with a rather matte finish. So the sandpaper that I'm going to be using today are these sandpapers, and I got these off of Fire Mountain Gems, and they're just cloths, and I prefer them to other sanding papers because unlike the wet dry sandpaper that I used to use quite a bit, they don't sand off your fingertips. So these ones I prefer, and they're more flexible than the wet dry sandpaper, and I find that if you make sure that you smooth out all the fingerprints before you bake your bead, they do a really fantastic job getting you to that lovely buffing finish. So I would spend quite a long time on my first grit, which is a 400, and then I'd go up the grits to my 8000, and I spend quite a bit of time on the last grit. Now because these are fairly soft, they don't take off a lot of clay, you can gently sand the edges just to get a bit of a buff on the edge later on. But if you're using wet dry sandpaper, I don't recommend sanding the edges until you get up to your highest grit, which is generally for me a 2000. I start at a 400 grit on the wet dry sandpaper, go up to a 600, then a 1200, and then finally stop at a 2000. So if you're using wet dry sandpaper and you want to sand the edges, wait until you get up to the 2000 grit. But with these ones, because they're fairly soft and they don't really take off a lot of clay, I can start at the lowest grit and sand the entire bead. So I'd sand all three of these ones. These ones I'm not going to sand. And then we can come back and I'll show you how to buff, drill and seal them with Renaissance wax. Okay, so I've just finished sanding it, and so if I move it around, hopefully you can see that it's got a slight shine to it. Now what we want to do before we buff or seal these with Renaissance wax is we want to drill them, because we can't drill them for at least an hour after we've put the Renaissance wax on, because that's how long I find the Renaissance takes to dry. So I like to drill first. Now this is just a hand drill that I use. I like the hand drills instead of the motorized drills because, well, it's safer and I feel like I have more control, and also it's less intimidating as well. So the one that I've got over here basically comes with a whole bunch of little drills, bits like these. This is just the one that I like using, and it comes with this thing that you can put your drill bits pieces into, and it's got different sized holes on each side, and you'll just pop that into there and then you screw the cap on and it will hold the drill bit in place. And so I've got another piece on this side with different sized holes as well. So that's the one that I like to use the most, but you can also get hold of these push drills where you push on the handle and it will turn the drill for you. Now I like these ones, but I find that they can be a little bit hard when it comes to beads like this, so I prefer using this type of drill. So what I'll do is I'll take the smallest size drill bit that I can get, and I will form a guide hole on each side of the bead. So I'll place it where I want it and start twisting. And now you don't want to apply too much pressure, you do want to apply a little bit, but not so much that you're pushing against the bead, because if your drill accidentally slips like that, it can accidentally go into your finger. So this size drill bit is quite small, and so you need to be a little careful of it because it can puncture you. With the larger size drill bits, that's less likely to happen, but when you're using the smaller drill bits, just be careful not to let it slip and get you. So once I've got a drill hole on this side of the bead, I like to go to the other side and drill another hole on the other side in the same spot. And the reason I like to do this is it helps me to drill straight. So I'll drill a little bit from this side, then I'll swap to the other side and continue drilling from the other side and swap back and forth until the two drill holes meet. And this is how I like to drill my beads. And we're going to be using AccuFlex in this project, so these holes don't really need to be any larger, but if you wanted these holes to be larger, you'd first start with the small drill bit like this one, and then you'd move on to a larger drill bit later on. So there we go. Reach the other side. Okay, so now you need to do a little bit of cleaning up. Make sure that your holes are nice and clean. Like to blow them out. And so that's what I've got, and that should be big enough for our AccuFlex. Now if you were going to make it bigger now, you'd go with a slightly larger drill bit and you drill through the exact same way I did before, using the guide hole as a guide. So I'll continue drilling these ones and I'll be back to show you how to buff and seal them with wax. Okay, so now that I've finished drilling these pieces, I'm going to show you how to get a slight buff and use the Renaissance wax. So I've just got a cloth over here, that's what I use to get a hand buff. Now you can use a Dremel. I also have a Dremel and I like using it, but for those of you who don't have a Dremel, because it is quite pricey, this will give you a pretty good buff as well. You just get an old rag like this, take your bead, it needs to be sanded really well for this to work. Even if you are using a Dremel, it needs to be sanded very well. And you'll just take it and rub it against the cloth as fast as you can. And this will build up friction and it will give you a buff. Like that. Now, the hand buff is never ever going to be as good as a Dremel will give you, but it gives a pretty good buff. So you don't have to have a Dremel to get a buff. There. So you can see it, that's a pretty good buff. So now what you'll do once you've buffed it is you'll bring over your Renaissance wax, and here's what it looks like. And what I like to do is I'll just swap to a different side. I like to brush a little bit onto the cloth and close this up afterwards because it stinks. It really does stink. So there's the bit where the wax is, and then I'll just rub the bead over that area as fast as I can so that I'm buffing it with the Renaissance wax. Now this is how you would do it without a Dremel. If you were to have a Dremel, taking a cloth and rubbing it onto the bead and then taking it over to the Dremel and buffing it is the way you would do it. But this is how you do it if you're going to hand buff it. Okay, so that's given it a pretty nice shine. So I'm going to bring over the lava ones and I'm going to show you what I would do with those ones, because they're a little different. Okay, I'll top up my wax just a little bit, you don't need a lot. And then holding these, I'll brush the wax onto them and then I'll also give them a little bit of a buff. But because we didn't sand these, their buff isn't going to look as good as the previous bead that I just showed. So this kind of just gives it a satiny finish, so that if you do angle it towards the light, you can see a little bit of a shine, but it's more of a matte finish compared to the other one. See, here's the one that we buffed, and here's the one that's just got the wax on it. So those are the two beads that I'm going to do, and I'm going to do these three as well, and I'll come back to show you how to string. Okay, so now that we have buffed our pieces, you're going to want to have let them dry for at least 10 minutes, otherwise you can risk giving them fingerprints while you string them. And before you wear this, you want to wait at least an hour. Now, I've got a piece of black Acuflex here, about 16 inches. I've got a toggle clasp, 2 crimps, 2 jump rings, and 2 charlotte crimps. And this is what I'm going to be using for today's stringing. So, you'll string on one of your charlotte crimps, like that. You'll take a crimp, put it half, just give it a little bit of a tail, and then crimp it flat, slide up the charlotte crimp, squeeze that closed so that it encases the crimp. And then we'll take one of the jump rings and we'll open that up, slide that onto the charlotte crimp, take a piece of the clasp, pop that on, and close up the jump ring again. Okay. Now, we are also going to need some onyx beads to space these out. Okay. So you'll string one onyx bead, and these are 4mm. You'll string that onto your strand. Then you'll take one of your beads, string that on, take another onyx bead, and so on until you're finished stringing your necklace. Okay, then just like before, you'll pop your charlotte crimp on, take your crimp, string it on part way, flatten that out, bring your charlotte crimp up, squeeze that flat, squeeze it flat with the pliers, bring over your crimp, your jump ring, open that up, put the other part of the clasp on, string that onto your charlotte crimp, and close. And that's it. There we are. So that's my take on what to do with the Jellyroll Mokume Gane sheet, and that's the project that I came up with. So I do hope that this tutorial was helpful to you, and if it was, please do check the links below, as there will be more links to tutorials like this one. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video. Bye for now.